The crowd's reaction made it look like Jasmine Paolini had just experienced instant regret. Center court was cheering for Alex Eala. Yet what really happened surprised everyone.
Thank you everybody who is here.
The truth is far more fascinating than the headline suggests. If you were sitting high in center court on the afternoon of July 6, 2026, you noticed it before a single ball was struck. The dark green seats were filled, the London air hovered around 31 degrees, and as the two players emerged from the tunnel, something subtle happened. The applause tilted. Not dramatically. Wimbledon crowds rarely do anything dramatically. It happened in the uniquely Wimbledon way. A fraction of a second here, a fraction of a second there. The applause for the 21-year-old from the Philippines began just a little earlier and lasted just a little longer than the applause for the Italian star who had reached the Wimbledon final on this very court only 2 years before. Alex Eala noticed. Jasmine Paolini noticed. Everyone inside center court noticed. And by the end of 2 hours and 22 minutes, the scoreboard would tell one story while the atmosphere inside the stadium would tell another. To understand why center court reacted that way, you have to go back 48 hours. On July 4th, Eala stepped onto the same court and produced the biggest victory of her career, defeating defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek in straight sets. The result sent shockwaves through the tournament and made history. According to official records, Eala became the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam. Almost immediately, the tennis world took notice. By Monday morning, highlights of the upset had exploded across social media and Wimbledon's digital platforms. Millions of fans had watched the match, discussed it, and shared it. Long before Eala walked back onto center court to face Paolini, the crowd already knew exactly who she was. But this is where the story requires precision. Because the reality is more interesting than the narrative many people later tried to create. Jasmine Paolini did not lose this match. She won it. The Italian battled through a difficult contest and earned a 6-4, 4-6, 6-3 victory to reach her first Grand Slam quarterfinal in 2 years. Afterwards, she thanked Roger Federer, who was watching from the royal box. In her press conference, she spoke about finding joy on court and described that joy as one of her greatest strengths. There was no controversy, no public complaint, no frustration directed toward the crowd. In fact, before the match even began, Paolini openly acknowledged that center court would likely be supporting Eala. She saw it coming. She understood the situation. And she walked into it anyway. That is what makes the story so compelling. This was not a case of a crowd turning against one of its favorites. It was a rare moment when center court collectively adopted someone new. For one afternoon, one of tennis' most traditional audiences decided that Alex Eala was the player they wanted to follow. And both women knew it from the very beginning. What makes that remarkable is Paolini's own history at Wimbledon. Only 2 years earlier, during her unforgettable run to the 2024 final, center court had fallen in love with her personality, her smile, and her fearless style of play. She had become one of the tournament's most popular figures. Normally, that kind of goodwill lasts. Normally, that kind of connection belongs to the player who earned it. But on this particular day, it wasn't enough. Because over the previous 48 hours, Alex Eala had become something larger than a rising prospect. She had become the story of the tournament. And center court couldn't look away. The crowd encouraged her through nervous moments early in the match. They stayed engaged when her serve struggled. They remained invested after she lost the opening set. And when she fought back in the second, saving pressure points, breaking Paolini's serve, and building momentum, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. The support became impossible to miss. "Let's go, Alex." The chants echoed around center court. That was the moment. Not a controversy. Not a betrayal. A recognition. Because center court does not embrace newcomers this quickly. It didn't happen immediately for Emma Raducanu. It didn't happen immediately for Coco Gauff. And it didn't fully happen for Paolini herself until she was deep into her run 2 years earlier. Yet Alex Eala received that level of support in the round of 16. She arrived as the number 29 seed. She entered the tournament ranked just outside the world's elite. She had never won a WTA singles title. And somehow she became the emotional center of Wimbledon. That's the anomaly. That's the real story. The numbers help explain why. Eala entered Wimbledon as the tournament's 29th seed while sitting just outside the top tier of the rankings. Her career earnings remained modest compared with established stars, and unlike many players still competing in the second week, she had yet to capture a WTA singles title. Across the net stood Jasmine Paolini, a Grand Slam finalist, a proven performer on the biggest stages, and one of the most respected players on tour. On paper, the crowd should have gravitated toward experience. Instead, they chose possibility. They chose the player who had just delivered one of the tournament's defining moments. And Paolini understood exactly why. Earlier in the season, the two had met in Dubai, where Eala earned a straight sets victory. That result served as a reminder that this wasn't simply a feel-good story. Eala had already proven she could challenge elite players. So when Paolini walked onto center court that afternoon, she wasn't facing an unknown outsider. She was facing the hottest story in tennis. And despite the crowd, despite the momentum, and despite the emotion surrounding her opponent, Paolini delivered the performance required to win. The scoreboard belonged to Paolini. But for one unforgettable afternoon at Wimbledon, center court belonged to Alex Eala. That is the part of this story that a headline can easily miss. Because the truth of what happened on center court was far more complicated and far more interesting. When the second set began, Alex Eala was staring at a crossroads. Paolini had already taken the opener, the Italian's experience was beginning to show, and center court seemed ready to witness the end of a remarkable run. Instead, Eala responded. She saved 3 break points early in the set. Moments later, she earned a break of her own. Point by point, game by game, she dragged herself back into the match. By the time she served out the set, the contest had become almost perfectly balanced. After nearly 90 minutes of tennis, the two players had won virtually the same number of points. And that is where the emotional peak of the afternoon arrived. Not at match point. Not after a spectacular winner. Not during a highlight reel rally. It came when center court realized there would be a third set. The roar that followed was unmistakable. "Let's go, Alex." That sound mattered. Because it wasn't the sound of a crowd supporting its favorite from the beginning. It was the sound of thousands of people discovering, in real time, who they wanted to win. Most of those spectators had purchased tickets long before Alex Eala became the story of Wimbledon. Many knew very little about her before the tournament began. Yet by the middle of that match, they had chosen. And that choice told its own story. Paolini had predicted it beforehand. She openly acknowledged that the crowd would likely support Eala. What she could not fully know was just how strong that support would become once the match started. Then reality returned. Because tennis is not a fairy tale. And grass courts are often unforgiving. The third set became a test of fundamentals, and one fundamental separated the players. Serve. At 4-3 in the decider, Eala's serving struggles finally caught up with her. A few loose errors opened the door, and Paolini walked through it. The Italian's level rose exactly when it needed to. Her first serve percentage improved. Her decision-making sharpened. Her experience became visible. While Eala fought to keep pace, Paolini began winning points more efficiently and controlling the pressure moments. One hold became another. One game became the next. And suddenly the finish line appeared. After 2 hours and 22 minutes, Jasmine Paolini crossed it first. Roger Federer applauded from the royal box. Center court rose in appreciation. And Paolini had earned every bit of it. What happened afterward may be the most revealing part of the entire afternoon. Because post-match interviews often tell you more than scoreboards. Paolini described the match as a roller coaster. She spoke about staying positive during difficult moments and finding joy even when things became complicated. That wasn't the language of someone frustrated by the crowd. It was the language of a veteran professional who understood exactly what Wimbledon can be. Sometimes center court falls in love with a player. Sometimes it chooses a story. And sometimes your job is simply to win anyway. Paolini did exactly that. Then came Eala's turn. Despite the disappointment, there was no bitterness. No excuses. No complaints. She acknowledged that her serve had not been at its best. She accepted responsibility for the mistakes. More importantly, she spoke about tennis with a maturity that felt far beyond her years. Every player, she explained, has days when their best level isn't there. Every player has moments when things don't work. That is part of the sport. And then she delivered the sentence that may explain why so many people connected with her throughout the tournament. She spoke about the beauty of tennis. Not despite the loss. Because of it. Center court heard that message long before she said the words. Fans respond to resilience. Fans respond to honesty. And fans respond to players who compete with courage even when the result doesn't go their way. That is exactly what Eala had done. Now zoom out from the match itself. Because what happened at Wimbledon was larger than one afternoon. Eala became the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the fourth round of a Grand Slam. That is not simply a personal achievement. It is a milestone in the history of Philippine tennis. Across the Philippines, watch parties formed around her matches. National leaders publicly congratulated her. Sports networks dedicated extensive coverage to her run. And the attention was not limited to her home country. Around the world, tennis fans were paying attention. Her upset victory over Iga Swiatek became one of the most watched stories of the tournament. Social media engagement exploded. Highlight packages generated massive audiences. Discussion forums filled with debates about her future. The momentum was real. The excitement was real. And perhaps most importantly, the tennis was real. Because while center court embraced Eala's story, the reason the story existed in the first place was simple. She could play. She had already defeated elite opponents. She had already shown she belonged on the biggest stages. And now the entire tennis world knew her name. That doesn't mean there aren't areas to improve. If Wimbledon revealed a strength, it also revealed a challenge. The serve remains the biggest question in Eala's game. On grass, serving weaknesses are amplified. Free points matter more. Short points matter more. Small technical flaws become larger problems. Against a player as experienced as Paolini, those flaws eventually became decisive. That isn't criticism. It's information. And great players build careers on learning from information. Which brings us to the next chapter. The hard court season. The Canadian Open. Cincinnati. And then the US Open. Those tournaments matter because hard courts have historically suited Eala's game better than grass. The surface rewards her movement, her timing, and her ability to redirect pace. More importantly, it provides another opportunity to prove that Wimbledon was not an isolated moment. Remember, this is a player who has already produced major results on hard courts, including deep runs against world-class competition. The question now is not whether she belongs. The question is how high she can climb. So what did center court cheering for Alex Eala actually mean? It did not mean Jasmine Paolini was rejected. It did not mean a torch was passed. It did not mean one era ended and another began. It meant something much simpler. A tennis crowd watched a young player compete with fearlessness, composure, and belief. And they responded. Paolini won the match. Eala won something else. She earned the trust of one of the most knowledgeable crowds in sports. As she left center court, she acknowledged the fans with a heart-shaped gesture. No trophy. No championship. No grand celebration. Just gratitude. And perhaps that image captures the entire tournament better than any statistic ever could. A player who arrived at Wimbledon as an intriguing prospect left it as a genuine contender. The rankings will continue to rise. The expectations will continue to grow. The scrutiny will increase. But so will the opportunities. The next stops are Canada, Cincinnati, and New York. The next tests will be tougher. The next opponents will know exactly who she is. And that may be the biggest change of all. Alex Eala is no longer a surprise. She is now part of the conversation. The story of Wimbledon 2026 may have ended in the fourth round. But the story of Alex Eala is only getting started. And if center court recognized something special before the rest of the tennis world did, the hard court season is about to tell us whether that crowd was early, or exactly right. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next tennis update.